He walked away from war believing silence would finally bring peace. Then a German shepherd appeared, trained for loyalty, abandoned by the system she once served. She didn't ask for help. She chose him, as if instinct knew what orders never could. Together, a veteran Navy SEAL and a dog uncovered a truth powerful people tried to erase. This is not just a story about courage or justice or loyalty. It's about the moment when God places a choice in front of you and waits. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from, and don't forget to like and subscribe to K9 Navy SEAL Legends. Morning came gently to the northern woods. Sunlight filtered through tall pines in thin, patient lines, touching the surface of the lake until it shimmered like broken glass. The air was cold but clean, carrying the scent of damp earth and thawing needles. Somewhere far off, a bird called once, then fell quiet again. Ethan Cole woke before the light reached the cabin. He always did. At 28, his body no longer belonged to sleep the way it once had. Years of conditioning had trained him to surface from rest already alert, already listening. He lay still on the narrow bed, one hand resting on his chest, counting breaths. Not because he needed to calm himself, but because the habit had never left him. The cabin was small and deliberate. One room, a stove, a table, a cot. No decorations, no photographs. Everything he owned had a function. He had learned, long ago, that clutter made noise. Ethan rose, pulled on his boots, and stepped outside. The lake stretched wide and quiet before him. No wind, no engines, just water, light, and the soft creak of wood as the dock adjusted to warming air. For a moment, he stood there, tall and broad-shouldered, his silhouette cutting clean lines against the morning. At nearly 6'3", with the dense, disciplined build of a man trained for endurance rather than show, he looked out of place and perfectly suited at the same time. His hair was cropped short, dark brown, cut by habit rather than regulation. A faint line of stubble traced his jaw, emphasizing the hard angles of his face. His eyes, blue-gray, deep-set, scanned the tree line without conscious thought. Even here, even now, some part of him was always on watch. This place had been chosen for that reason. Isolation without hostility. Silence without emptiness. Ethan followed the narrow trail that ran along the lake's edge, his boots pressing softly into damp soil. He ran most mornings, but today he walked. The stillness felt earned, and he didn't rush it. That was when he saw the dog. At first he thought it was a trick of light, a shadow folding oddly between the trees. Then it moved. The German shepherd stood on the trail ahead of him, no more than 20 yards away. Large, balanced, alert. Its coat was black and tan, short and dense, the kind bred for work rather than warmth. One ear twitched slightly, tracking something Ethan couldn't hear. The dog did not bark. It did not approach. It simply stood there, watching him. Ethan stopped. Years of training tightened his posture before his mind could catch up. Weight balanced, hands loose at his sides. Not threatening, not careless. This was not a stray. Strays carried hunger in their movements, uncertainty. This dog held itself with discipline. Its stance was square, its center of gravity low and controlled. Even the way it breathed, slow, measured, spoke of conditioning layered over instinct. The dog's eyes met his, dark, focused, intelligent. A thin scar traced one high around its neck. The fur lay uneven, as if something had once been removed too roughly. K9, Ethan murmured without meaning to. The word settled heavily in his chest. The dog shifted. then turned away from him. 3 steps down the trail, it stopped and looked back. Not pleading, expectant. Ethan frowned. He had not spoken. He had not moved. Still, the animal waited, as if the choice had already been made, and he was simply slow to follow. "Not your guy," Ethan said quietly, more to himself than the dog. He took 1 step back. The dog did not follow. It sat. Calm, patient, Ethan felt something tighten behind his ribs. He had walked away from things before. People, decisions, orders that came wrapped in clean language and ugly outcomes. Distance had seemed like the right answer then. It didn't feel like one now. With a slow exhale, he stepped forward. The dog rose immediately and continued down the trail. They moved through sunlight and shade, the forest opening and closing around them. The trail remained gentle, ordinary, fallen needles, soft earth, the distant sound of water. Too ordinary. Ethan noticed the details anyway. A faint metallic tang beneath the scent of pine. A shallow indentation in the soil where something heavy had been dragged. A length of clear plastic half buried near a tree root. The dog slowed. Its ears flattened slightly. Its pace changed. Not faster, but more deliberate. Then, without warning, it stopped and growled. Low, controlled. Ethan froze, heart ticking once, twice. His gaze followed the dog's line of sight, an empty stretch of trees, sunlight flickering harmlessly through branches. Nothing moved. "Easy," he said, voice calm. The dog did not advance. It did not retreat. It simply stood there, muscles taut, reading something Ethan could not. Then, just as abruptly, it relaxed. Its head lowered. The growl cut off. Ethan's jaw tightened. "That was wrong," he said quietly. The dog turned to look at him. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across its face. Not fear. Memory? The moment lingered longer than it should have. Ethan felt it then. Not danger, but recognition. The dog hadn't been reacting to what was there. It had been reacting to what used to be. Training. A place. A sound that no longer existed, but still lived somewhere inside its body. "Someone taught you to be afraid of this spot," Ethan said. The dog did not look away. Instead, it took 1 step closer to him and sat, as if acknowledging the mistake, as if waiting to see whether he would walk away now. Ethan didn't. They reached the lake again, where the shoreline curved inward, forming a shallow inlet. A weathered boathouse leaned at the edge of the water, its boards sun-bleached and cracked. No boats, no signs of use. The dog approached it cautiously. Inside, Ethan found what didn't belong. Medical gauze, an empty syringe case, a strip of black tape stuck to the floor. Everything clean, everything deliberate. Not abandoned. Removed. Ethan crouched, running his fingers along the wood. The dog stood beside him, head lowered, breathing steady but shallow. Up close, Ethan could see the wear beneath the animal's composure. The tension held too long. The discipline stretched thin. "You didn't run," Ethan said softly. "You were brought." The dog's ears flicked at the sound of his voice. When Ethan stood, the dog followed without hesitation. Back at the cabin, Ethan cleaned the shallow cuts along the dog's leg, his hands steady. The animal endured it in silence, eyes tracking his movements with sharp attention. When his fingers brushed its neck, he felt it. The ridge of old scar tissue beneath the fur. A collar wound. Whoever had last handled this dog hadn't cared how it came off. "You don't have a name," Ethan said. The dog blinked once. Night fell slowly. The lake darkened. The forest settled. The dog lay near the door, awake, watching the same stretch of shoreline long after the light had faded. Ethan sat at the table, hands wrapped around a mug gone cold, aware of a truth he could no longer ignore. This dog hadn't wandered here by accident, and whatever it had escaped from hadn't finished looking for it. Ethan did not sleep. The cabin settled into night with the slow, familiar sounds of cooling wood and distant water, but his mind stayed alert, circling the same quiet truths. The dog, Valkyrie, though he still hadn't named her aloud, remained near the door, her body stretched long on the floorboards, head lifted just enough to watch the darkness beyond the threshold. She hadn't moved since sundown. Not to eat, not to rest, only to listen. Ethan sat at the small table, the lamp casting a warm circle of light that didn't quite reach the corners of the room. He watched her out of the corner of his eye, careful not to stare. Dogs like this noticed everything. Too much attention could feel like pressure. "You can sleep," he said quietly. Her ears flicked, but she didn't turn. Ethan leaned back in the chair, exhaled slowly. He had seen this before, in men, not animals. The refusal to rest when vigilance felt like the only thing keeping the world from collapsing again. Sometime after midnight, she finally lowered her head. Ethan rose immediately. He moved without sound, pulling a blanket from the cot and folding it near the door, close enough that she could feel its presence without being forced into it. When he stepped back, she opened one eye, assessed, then shifted just enough to let the fabric touch her flank. Trust. Given carefully. Morning came clearer than the day before. The town sat 20 minutes down the road, tucked between the lake and a low ridge of trees. Small, orderly. The kind of place people pass through without remembering. Unless they stayed long enough to be folded into it, Ethan parked near the edge of the main street and stepped out with the dog at his side. She drew attention immediately. Not because she was aggressive or loud, but because she moved with a purpose that set her apart. Her stride was measured, her head level. People noticed discipline even when they didn't know the word for it. A man outside the hardware store paused mid-conversation, eyes following her. A woman walking her lab mix tightened her grip on the leash, then relaxed when Valkyrie didn't spare them a glance. Ethan felt the familiar weight of being watched, though no one stared directly at him. At 6'3", broad and squared, with a bearing that suggested command even in silence, he was hard to ignore. His uniform, digital camouflage, clean but worn, didn't belong here, and everyone knew it. He followed the sign for the veterinary clinic. The clinic smelled of antiseptic and pine cleaner, a careful balance meant to soothe both people and animals. The bell above the door chimed once as Ethan entered. Behind the counter stood a woman in her mid-30s. She was tall and slender, with a posture shaped by long hours on her feet rather than fragility. Her dark brown hair was pulled back into a low, practical braid that brushed the collar of her jacket. A few premature silver strands caught the light, not hidden, not highlighted. Her skin was pale from mountain winters, marked faintly at the eyes by fatigue rather than age. She looked up, met Ethan's gaze, and then dropped immediately to the dog. Her expression changed. Not surprise, recognition. "When did you find her?" the woman asked. Ethan blinked. "This morning." The woman rounded the counter without hesitation, crouching just far enough away to give the dog space. Her movements were slow, deliberate, experienced. Valkyrie did not retreat, but her muscles tensed. "Easy," the woman murmured. "I'm not here to touch you." She glanced up at Ethan. "I'm Dr. Madison Shaw. Most people call me Maddie." Her voice was calm, but there was an edge beneath it. Alertness sharpened by history. "She's not a stray," Maddie continued, eyes never leaving the dog. "And she's not lost." Ethan studied Maddie more closely now. There was something restrained about her, like a person who had learned when to stop asking questions because answers came with consequences. "What makes you so sure?" he asked. Maddie straightened slightly. "Because she's watching the exits. Because she hasn't sniffed anything in this room. And because she hasn't once looked at me like I'm in charge." That earned a faint twitch of Valkyrie's ear. Maddie's lips pressed together. "May I?" Ethan nodded. The examination was quiet. Maddie checked Valkyrie's legs, her shoulders, the healed scar tissue at her neck. When she reached the collar area, her fingers paused, just for a second. "Someone removed her tracking hardware," Maddie said. "Not cleanly." She leaned back on her heels, exhaling slowly. "I've seen this before." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Where?" Maddie hesitated. Then she stood, brushing her hands on her pants, and met his eyes directly. "In programs that didn't want paperwork." Before Ethan could respond, the door opened again. A man stepped inside. Snow-bright light, framing him for a brief moment. He was in his late 40s, broad but worn, with a graying beard trimmed short and eyes that had learned patience the hard way. His ranger jacket bore the marks of long use. Faded patches, frayed seams repaired more than once. "Morning, Maddie," he said. She stiffened. "Tom," she replied. "You're early." Tom Alvarez's gaze shifted to Ethan, then to the dog. It lingered there, measuring. Not suspicious. Curious in the way of someone who had spent years cataloging patterns. "That's her, isn't it?" Tom said quietly. Maddie closed her eyes for half a breath. "Yes." Ethan's attention sharpened. "You two know each other." Tom nodded once. "We know the problem." He crouched slightly, not too close. Valkyrie's eyes followed him, unreadable. "I've been tracking a private training operation near the North Ridge," Tom said. "Legitimate on paper. Clean inspections. But dogs keep disappearing from the system. And no one notices?" Ethan asked. Tom's mouth curved into something that wasn't a smile. "People notice. They just don't push." Maddie crossed her arms, hugging herself. "Last time I pushed, I lost my contract." Ethan looked at her again. Really looked this time. At the tired set of her shoulders, the careful restraint in her voice. "What happened?" he asked. Maddie swallowed. "I flagged a medical report. A dog didn't come back from reassignment. The file closed itself 2 days later." Silence settled between them. Valkyrie shifted, stepping closer to Ethan, her shoulder brushing his leg. Not seeking comfort, claiming position. Suddenly, Valkyrie's head snapped up, her ears locked forward, body rigid. She stared at the clinic's back hallway, at nothing Ethan could see. Maddie frowned. "What is it, girl?" Valkyrie didn't growl, didn't bark. She lowered her head and backed away slowly, placing herself between Ethan and the corridor. Tom's hand dropped instinctively toward his belt. "There's no one back there," Maddie said. But her voice lacked conviction. Ethan felt it then. Not fear, but certainty. Whatever Valkyrie sensed wasn't present. It was remembered. The moment passed. Valkyrie relaxed, though she didn't leave Ethan's side. Tom straightened. "I don't think she ran. I think she was released." Maddie looked at Ethan, which means someone decided she was a liability. Ethan's gaze drifted to the window, to the quiet street beyond. People passed with groceries. Children laughed somewhere out of sight, a town that knew how to look away. "I didn't come here for this," Ethan said finally. Tom nodded. "No one ever does." Maddie studied Ethan's face, the hard angles, the stillness that spoke of choices made under pressure. "You don't have to stay involved," she said. "I can make some calls." Ethan looked down at Valkyrie, at the faint scar at her neck, at the steadiness in her eyes. He shook his head once. "If I walk away now, she disappears." Maddie didn't argue. Outside, the bell chimed again as someone entered the clinic, the sound light and ordinary. Life continuing, indifferent. Ethan rested a hand briefly against Valkyrie's shoulder. For the first time since leaving the service, he felt the weight of a decision settle. Not as a burden, but as something earned. And he knew, with quiet clarity, that whatever line this dog had crossed to reach him, he had just stepped over it too. Ethan left the clinic with the sense that the town had shifted around him. Nothing had changed on the surface. Cars moved slowly along the main street. A pair of teenagers laughed near the diner. Someone waved to Tom as he crossed toward his truck. Ordinary life, moving on its rails. But Ethan felt the weight of eyes now. Not on him directly, not yet, but somewhere nearby, aware. Valkyrie stayed close at his left side as they walked. Not crowding, not anxious, just present. Her gait was smooth, controlled, each step measured as if she were counting distance rather than covering it. The black and tan coat caught the sunlight, revealing muscle built for endurance rather than speed. She looked healthy at a glance. Only someone trained to notice would see the tension still held in her shoulders. "You don't like towns," Ethan said quietly. Valkyrie's ears flicked, but she didn't look up. Ethan understood that feeling. Towns asked questions, forests didn't. They drove north, following the narrow road that wound along the lake before climbing gently toward higher ground. Maddie followed in her truck, keeping a careful distance. Tom had gone ahead to check a boundary marker near the ridge, a pretext that allowed him to scout without raising attention. The facility appeared suddenly. One moment there was forest, sunlight breaking through branches, and the next there was a clean stretch of fencing and a modest sign mounted on fresh wood. North Ridge Canine Performance Center. No warnings, no secrecy. Just professionalism rendered in neutral tones. Ethan parked along the shoulder and cut the engine. From the outside, it looked harmless. Low buildings set back from the road. Well-maintained gravel. A line of young trees planted with intention rather than carelessness. Even the wind seemed quieter here, as if trained not to disturb. Valkyrie stiffened the moment Ethan opened the door. Her head lifted. Her breathing changed. Shorter, sharper. One paw hovered before touching the ground. Ethan placed a hand on her shoulder, feeling the sudden hardness beneath the fur. "You know this place." She did not pull away. She did not move forward. Maddie joined them, closing her truck doors softly. In daylight, she looked more tired than she had in the clinic. Her jacket hung open, revealing a simple gray shirt beneath. She scanned the buildings with a practiced eye, jaw set. "They passed inspection last quarter," she said. "State and private." Ethan glanced at her. "You don't sound convinced." Maddie shrugged once. Clean facilities don't mean clean intent. Tom emerged from the trees a few minutes later, brushing pine needles from his jacket. He was breathing evenly, but his eyes were sharper than before. "No trespassing signs start 50 yards in," he said. "They're well within their rights to call this in." "And you?" Ethan asked. Tom's mouth tightened. "I'm well within my rights to observe from public land." They stood there for a moment, 3 people and 1 dog, looking at a place that offered no obvious threat. That was what bothered Ethan most. He had learned, overseas, to distrust anything that tried too hard to appear orderly. They followed the fence line, moving slowly, keeping distance. Ethan noticed cameras. Small, well-placed, unobtrusive, not excessive. Just enough to see without being seen. Valkyrie walked at Ethan's side until they reached the corner near the rear building. Then she stopped. Her body angled away from the structure, her head lowered. A low sound rumbled in her chest. Not a growl, not a whine, something older, deeper. Maddie inhaled sharply. That's a fear response. No, Ethan said. He knelt beside Valkyrie, careful not to touch her yet. That's recognition. Valkyrie's eyes fixed on a narrow service door at the back of the building. The door was closed. Unremarkable. Painted the same clean white as the rest. Ethan followed her gaze and felt a faint tightening in his chest. He couldn't explain it. But the air felt different here. Thinner. Like a held breath. This is where they kept you, he said softly. Valkyrie did not confirm. She did not deny it either. Maddie glanced around, lowering her voice. We shouldn't stay long. Ethan nodded. He wasn't here to break in. Not yet. They turned back toward the road. And that was when Ethan noticed the man watching them. He stood near the front office, leaning casually against the railing as if he had stepped out for air. Mid-40s, maybe. Tall, lean. His dark hair was cut close at the sides, silver just beginning to show at the temples. A neatly trimmed beard framed a face that might have been handsome if not for the way his eyes calculated rather than connected. He raised one hand in a small, polite wave. Can I help you folks? His voice carried easily across the distance, warm and measured. Tom stiffened almost imperceptibly. Ethan stepped forward, posture relaxed but alert. Just admiring the view. The man smiled. It's a good one. Not many people come this far up. His gaze shifted to Maddie, to Tom, and finally to Valkyrie. It lingered there just a fraction longer than necessary. Beautiful dog, he said. German Shepherd? Yes, Ethan replied. Well trained, the man added. You don't see that level of discipline in civilian dogs. Valkyrie did not look at him. Her eyes stayed on the building behind him. The man noticed. Something flickered across his expression, not surprise, but irritation quickly smoothed away. My name's Daniel Reed, he said. I oversee operations here. Tom inclined his head. Tom Alvarez, Ranger. Daniel's smile thinned. Of course you are. Maddie said nothing. Her arms were crossed now, hands tucked beneath her elbows, as if bracing herself. Daniel's gaze returned to Ethan. You're a little far from home, soldier. The word landed carefully. Ethan met his eyes without blinking. So are you. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Daniel stepped aside, gesturing toward the fence. You're welcome to contact our office if you have questions. Otherwise, I'd appreciate you respecting private property. Tom nodded once. We are. Daniel's smile returned, polite as before. Good. As they walked away, Ethan felt it again. That quiet certainty that something had just been measured and found wanting. Not them. Valkyrie. They didn't speak until they were back on the road. The facility hidden by trees once more. Maddie let out a breath she'd been holding. He knew. Tom glanced at her. He suspected. Ethan kept his eyes on the road. He recognized her. Silence followed. They returned to the cabin as the afternoon light softened, shadows stretching longer across the lake. Ethan checked the perimeter without comment, habit guiding him. Nothing disturbed. No signs of intrusion. Inside, Valkyrie paced once, then lay down near the stove. She turned her head toward the door, ears angled back. Not relaxed, but listening. Maddie sat at the table, laptop open, fingers hovering above the keys. If we pull records now, it'll raise flags. Tom nodded. Already has. Ethan leaned against the counter, arms crossed. Then, we don't pull records. Maddie looked up. Then, what do we do? Ethan looked down at Valkyrie, at the steady rise and fall of her chest, at the way her eyes tracked every sound, every shift in air. We wait, he said, and we watch. As if summoned by the words, Valkyrie lifted her head sharply. She crossed the room in 3 silent steps and pressed her nose against the front door, inhaling deeply. Her body went rigid. Ethan felt it before he heard it, a faint vibration through the floorboards. An engine. Not close, not loud, but deliberate. Valkyrie did not bark. She looked back at Ethan once, her eyes clear and unblinking. And for the first time since he'd met her, she didn't ask him to follow. She asked him to be ready. The sound passed, faded, or moved somewhere it couldn't be seen. Maddie closed her laptop slowly. Someone's watching the cabin. Tom's jaw tightened. Then they're not as clean as they pretend to be. Ethan stood still, listening to the quiet return. He had hoped once that walking away would mean peace. Instead, it had only delayed this moment. He looked down at Valkyrie again and felt something settle into place. Not fear, not anger, but resolve. Whatever they're hiding, he said, they don't expect us to stay. Outside, the lake reflected the sky in soft, broken light. And somewhere beyond the trees, a line had been crossed. The lake came alive by mid-morning. Boats lined the dock in uneven rows, their hulls rocking gently as people moved between them. Laughter and music carrying easily across the water. Banners fluttered from wooden posts, bright against the blue sky. Someone had set up speakers near the shoreline, and a familiar country tune drifted through the air, cheerful and untroubled. It was the town's spring festival, an annual ritual that marked the end of snow and the beginning of forgiveness. People smiled more freely on days like this. They believed winter had taken its share and would not return so soon. Ethan stood near the edge of the crowd, Valkyrie at his side. She wore no vest, no collar, nothing that marked her as anything other than a well-built German shepherd. Still, she drew attention. Children slowed when they passed her. Adults glanced twice, registering something they couldn't name. Discipline, maybe. Or the way her gaze stayed level and aware. Maddie moved among the stalls. Nearby, her posture relaxed in a way that felt deliberate rather than natural. She had changed clothes, trading her jacket for a lighter coat. But the tension hadn't left her shoulders. She spoke easily with townspeople, asking about boats, about weather, about nothing at all. Tom stood farther back, near the tree line, his ranger jacket blending into shadow. He watched the perimeter the way he always did, without hurry, without expectation that danger would announce itself. "You don't have to stay," Maddie had said earlier, as they'd parked near the festival grounds. Ethan had shaken his head. "If I leave now, it looks like guilt." Maddie hadn't argued. Ethan scanned the crowd, cataloging movement without appearing to. He noticed the way conversation shifted when Valkyrie passed, how people unconsciously gave her space. Dogs like her altered the air around them. A group of children ran along the dock, shrieking with laughter. One boy, no more than 6 or 7, broke away, sprinting toward the end of the pier where the boards darkened with damp. His shoes skidded. Ethan's body reacted before his mind did. So did Valkyrie. She lunged, not in panic, not in frenzy, but with precise intent. Her teeth caught the back of the boy's jacket, tugging him just hard enough to stop his momentum. The child stumbled backward, landing on his hands, eyes wide with shock. The water lapped inches from where he'd been. For a heartbeat, the world froze. Then the boy's mother screamed. Ethan was already there, crouching, one hand steadying the child's shoulder. "You're okay," he said, voice firm, grounding. "You're safe." The boy burst into tears, more from fear than pain. Valkyrie released the jacket immediately and stepped back, sitting calmly, as if nothing extraordinary had occurred. The dock erupted in noise, voices overlapping, relief pouring out in uncontrolled bursts. Someone clapped, someone else swore. The boy's mother dropped to her knees, pulling her son into her arms, sobbing. She looked up at Valkyrie, then at Ethan. "Thank you," she said, breathless. "Oh my God, thank you." Ethan nodded once. He didn't smile. Valkyrie's ears flicked at the sound of applause, but her gaze had already shifted, away from the dock, away from the grateful faces. Toward the far end of the festival, Ethan followed her line of sight. A man stood near the boat ramp, half hidden by a cluster of people. He was tall, broad through the shoulders, wearing a windbreaker zipped halfway up. His hair was dark and close-cropped. A faint scar traced the edge of his jaw, catching the light when he turned. He wasn't clapping. He was watching Valkyrie. When their eyes met, he looked away. The incident became the story of the hour. People stopped Ethan to shake his hand. Someone offered him a beer. Someone else asked where he'd trained the dog. He deflected politely, his answers short, careful. Maddie stepped in when she could, redirecting attention, keeping things light. Valkyrie remained composed, accepting gentle pats from children with tolerance rather than enthusiasm. Her focus drifted often toward the boat ramp, her body angling subtly in that direction whenever the crowd shifted. Tom approached as the noise settled. "You see him?" Ethan nodded. He saw her first. Tom's eyes narrowed. "Description?" "Mid-30s to early 40s, built, military posture." Tom exhaled slowly. "Not local." Maddie joined them, lowering her voice. "People are taking pictures." Ethan glanced around. Phones were out now, raised casually, documenting what would become a feel-good post by evening. He felt the familiar unease of attention settling in. "That's not good," Maddie added. Before Ethan could respond, Valkyrie's posture changed. She stood, muscles tightening, head lifting sharply. The air shifted. Ethan felt it too, a subtle pressure, like a storm forming far out on the lake. The man from the ramp was gone. In his place, a woman approached from between two vendor tents. She was in her late 50s, maybe early 60s, with short gray hair cut in a practical, no-nonsense style. Her face was lined not by age alone, but by years spent outdoors. She wore a navy windbreaker with an official patch stitched onto the chest and carried herself with quiet authority. "Mr. Cole?" she asked. Her voice was calm, professional. "Yes," Ethan replied. "My name is Agent Rebecca Collins," she said, holding up a badge briefly before returning it to her pocket. "Federal oversight. I'd like a word when you have a moment." Maddie's stomach dropped. Tom straightened. Ethan held Collins's gaze. Her eyes were sharp, assessing without hostility. She looked like someone who preferred facts to drama. "Now?" Ethan asked. Collins glanced at Valkyrie, then back at him. "Soon. Somewhere quieter." Ethan nodded. "Of course." She stepped away without another word. Maddie exhaled. "That was fast." Tom frowned. Too fast. They regrouped near the edge of the park, where the sound of music faded into background noise. "What does federal oversight want with a dog rescue?" Maddie asked. Ethan didn't answer right away. He was watching Valkyrie, who had settled again but remained alert, eyes tracking the crowd. "She's not here because of the rescue," he said finally. "She's here because of who owns the questions." Tom nodded. Someone made a call. Valkyrie stood suddenly and walked straight toward the water. Not the dock, not the boats. The narrow strip of shoreline beyond the festival boundary. Ethan followed, pulse quickening. She stopped at the water's edge, nose lowered, inhaling deeply. Then she lifted her head and looked back at him, not with urgency, but with certainty, as if saying, "This matters." Ethan stepped beside her. In the wet sand near the shore, partially washed by small waves, were fresh footprints, booted, deliberate, leading away from the crowd, leading north. Ethan knelt, examining the prints. "They left recently?" Tom joined him, scanning the tree line. "Boat ramps the other direction." Maddie's voice was tight. "So why come this way?" Ethan stood, following the trail with his eyes. "Because they wanted to be seen." Valkyrie took a single step forward, then stopped, waiting. Ethan didn't move. "Not yet," he murmured. They returned to the festival as Agent Collins approached again, her expression unchanged. "Walk with me," she said. They moved along the edge of the park, the lake glittering beside them. Collins kept her voice low. "There's been an inquiry," she said. "Private training facilities, missing assets. You and your dog have intersected with something bigger than a rescue story." Maddie's hands clenched. "Are we in trouble?" Collins glanced at her. "That depends on what you know." Her gaze returned to Ethan. "And what you're willing to say." Ethan felt the weight of the moment settle into his chest. Not fear, recognition. This was the choice he'd avoided. He looked down at Valkyrie, who met his eyes calmly, without expectation or demand. "Whatever's coming," he said evenly. "I'm not handing her over." Collins studied him for a long second. Then she nodded. "That's not what I asked." She stepped back, already turning away. "We'll speak again." As she disappeared into the crowd, the music swelled, laughter rising as if nothing had happened. Ethan stood still, the festival moving around him, aware of a truth he could no longer deny. Staying invisible was no longer an option, and somewhere beyond the shoreline, someone was already adjusting their plans. The festival ended without ceremony. By sunset, the boats had thinned out, music fading into memory as people folded chairs and packed coolers. Laughter lingered in small clusters, then dissolved into the ordinary quiet of evening. What remained felt heavier, not because something had happened, but because something had been noticed. Ethan drove back toward the cabin with the windows down. The air smelled of water and cut grass. A calm evening, the kind that usually allowed him to breathe easier. Tonight, it pressed against him instead, full of unfinished edges. Valkyrie sat upright in the passenger seat, gaze fixed forward. Her posture hadn't softened since the shoreline encounter. No tension in her muscles, no panic, but a readiness that did not belong to rest. "You picked a bad day to become famous," Ethan said quietly. Her ears flicked, but she didn't look at him. Back at the cabin, Maddie and Tom arrived within minutes of each other. No lights were turned on at first. Habit. Caution. Tom circled the perimeter while Ethan unlocked the door, scanning shadows without appearing to. Everything was untouched. Inside, the cabin smelled faintly of wood smoke and lake air. Valkyrie entered first, moving through the space in a slow arc. checking corners, the door, the window facing the water. Only when she returned to Ethan's side did he set his keys down. Maddie sat at the table, shoulders tight, hands wrapped around a mug she hadn't filled. In the low light, her face looked drawn, the lines near her eyes deeper than they'd been that morning. "I don't like this," she said. Tom leaned against the counter, ranger jacket still on, boots dusty. His beard caught the lamplight, emphasizing the hard angles of his jaw. He had the look of a man who'd spent years watching problems grow roots while waiting for permission to cut them out. "You weren't supposed to," he replied. Maddie exhaled. Federal oversight doesn't show up because of a feel-good rescue story. Ethan rested his hands on the back of a chair. "No, it shows up when someone upstream gets nervous." Tom nodded. "Daniel Reed didn't expect attention, not like that." "Daniel Reed doesn't expect resistance," Maddie added. Silence followed. Outside, the lake reflected the darkening sky, ripples catching the last light like fractured glass. Ethan broke the quiet. "We don't push yet." Maddie looked up sharply. "Ethan?" "We wait," he continued. "We watch, and we don't act without leverage." Tom studied him for a long moment. Then he gave a slow nod. "That's the right call." Maddie didn't look convinced. "And if they move first?" Ethan glanced at Valkyrie. "She'll tell us," he said. The night passed without interruption. Too quietly. By morning, the cabin felt different. Not violated, not threatened, but aware. Ethan noticed it the moment he stepped outside. Birds still called from the tree line. The lake was calm. But the air carried a faint pressure, like something holding its breath. Valkyrie circled the clearing, nose low, movements precise. She stopped near the old tool shed Ethan rarely used, her tail still, ears angled forward. Ethan followed. The shed door was ajar. It hadn't been the night before. Inside, nothing was missing. Tools hung where they always had. The floor was clean, too clean. Ethan crouched, running his fingers along the concrete near the threshold. A faint scuff mark. Someone had stepped inside, looked around, left without taking anything. A message. "They know where we live," Maddie said behind him. Ethan straightened. "They already did." Tom crossed his arms. "This is escalation." "No," Ethan replied. "This is testing." They gathered back inside. Maddie opened her laptop, fingers moving quickly, pulling maps and satellite images onto the screen. "If North Ridge is clean on paper, then the dirt is somewhere adjacent," she said. "Storage, transport, or off-site training." Tom leaned over her shoulder. "There's an old service road on the north side of the ridge. Decommissioned years ago. Doesn't show up on most public maps." Ethan's attention sharpened. "Where does it lead?" Tom's mouth tightened. "To a maintenance annex that was never properly decommissioned." Maddie looked up. "You think that's where they keep what doesn't fit the paperwork?" Tom nodded once. "I think that's where dogs go when they stop being assets." The words settled heavily in the room. Ethan looked down at Valkyrie. Her eyes were on the laptop screen, not understanding images, but reacting to tone, tension, the subtle cues of decision. "We don't go in blind," Maddie said. "We observe." "From public land," Tom added. Ethan closed the laptop gently. At dusk. They parked well short of the ridge, leaving the truck hidden beneath low branches. The air cooled as the sun dropped, shadows stretching long and thin across the forest floor. Valkyrie moved ahead now, not leading, not following, matching Ethan's pace exactly. Her coat blended easily into the darkening woods, muscles shifting smoothly beneath her skin. She looked whole, focused, But as they neared the service road, her pace slowed. Her head lowered, her ears flattened slightly. Ethan raised a hand, signaling the others to stop. He crouched beside her. "What is it?" She didn't respond with sound. Instead, she turned her head toward the trees, toward a stretch of undergrowth that looked no different from the rest. Ethan followed her gaze. "Nothing." Maddie whispered, "Do you smell something?" Valkyrie shifted closer to Ethan, pressing her shoulder lightly against his knee. Not fear, refusal. "She won't go further," Maddie said softly. Tom frowned. "That doesn't make sense. She led us here." Ethan studied Valkyrie's face, the tightness around her eyes, the way her breathing had changed. "She remembers this place," he said, "not as a location, as an outcome." They waited. The forest held its silence. Then, faintly, came a sound. Metal. Not clanging, sliding. Ethan felt the old instinct surge, clarity cutting through hesitation. "Someone's down there," he murmured. Without warning, Valkyrie stepped forward. Not toward the service road, but sideways, toward the trees. She stopped beside a narrow depression in the ground, barely visible beneath leaves and dirt. She pawed once, then looked back at Ethan, eyes steady. Ethan knelt, brushing away debris. A hidden access panel. His pulse kicked up. This wasn't a memory. This was a secret. They didn't open it. Not yet. Tom marked the location quietly. Maddie photographed the area from multiple angles, hands steady despite the tremor in her breath. "We have enough," she said. "For now." Ethan replaced the leaves carefully, restoring the ground to its earlier state. Valkyrie watched, alert, ready. They retreated the way they'd come, careful not to rush, careful not to leave sign. Back at the cabin, darkness had fully settled. Ethan locked the door, then rested his back against it for a moment longer than necessary. He felt the weight of the day finally press in. Maddie sat heavily at the table. "That wasn't supposed to exist." Tom nodded. "No, it wasn't." Ethan looked down at Valkyrie, who had curled near the hearth, eyes half closed but not asleep. "They didn't plan for her," he said. Maddie met his gaze. "They will now." Ethan felt the truth of that settle into his bones. Staying invisible was no longer an option, but neither was rushing. Outside, the forest returned to stillness, the hidden panel silent beneath its cover of leaves. And somewhere beyond the ridge, a door that had never been meant to open had already been found. The response came faster than Ethan expected. By the next morning, the forest no longer felt neutral. It wasn't hostile, not yet. But it had lost its indifference. Every sound carried weight. Every absence of sound did too. Ethan noticed it while loading supplies into the truck. Valkyrie circled the clearing once, nose low, tail steady. She stopped near the tree line, ears angling outward, catching something distant. Not close enough to be urgent, close enough to matter. "They're not hiding anymore," Maddie said quietly. She stood a few steps back, arms folded against the chill, dark hair pulled into a tight braid. In daylight, her slender frame looked almost fragile, but the way she held herself, chin level, shoulders squared, spoke of a woman who had learned how to stand her ground, even when her footing wasn't secure. Tom joined them from the cabin, phone in hand. "I just got a call," he said. "Unofficial." Ethan turned. "From?" Tom hesitated. "Stay level. Someone wanted to know why I was hiking near a decommissioned service road last night." Maddie exhaled sharply. So the window just closed. Or narrowed, Ethan replied. He checked the straps on his pack, movements precise. His uniform, digital camouflage, clean but worn, made him visible in ways he couldn't afford now. Still, he didn't change. Hiding who he was had never helped him before. "We don't go back to the panel," Maddie said. "Not yet." Ethan nodded. "Agreed." Tom studied him. "Then what's the move?" Ethan looked at Valkyrie. She had shifted closer without sound, positioning herself at his side. Her eyes were clear, focused. Not on the forest, but on him. "We draw them out," Ethan said. Maddie stiffened. "That's risky." "Yes," he said evenly. "But it's controlled." Tom's jaw tightened. "You're thinking bait." "I'm thinking pressure," Ethan corrected. "They're careful when they think they're invisible. They make mistakes when they think they're being watched." Maddie searched his face. "And what if you're wrong?" Ethan didn't answer right away, because the truth was, he had been wrong before. A delayed extraction. A call that came too late. A man who trusted procedure more than instinct, and paid for it. "I won't leave this time," he said finally. The words landed with quiet weight. They split roles carefully. Tom would stay visible, working his ranger routes, making no effort to hide his presence. Maddie would return to town, act normal, talk to people, listen. Ethan would remain at the cabin, with Valkyrie. The most obvious position. The easiest one to monitor. By mid-afternoon, the pressure made itself known. A truck passed the cabin road twice. Different directions. Same engine note. Valkyrie tracked it both times, head lifting, body still. Ethan stood on the porch, arms crossed, gaze steady. He made no attempt to conceal himself. Let them see. The third pass came closer. The truck slowed just long enough to confirm what it already knew. That Ethan was still there. By evening, the air felt tight. Maddie returned just before sunset, parking farther down the road and walking the rest of the way. Her expression was drawn. "People are talking," she said. "About the dog. About you. Someone mentioned federal interest." Tom arrived minutes later, his face set. "I've been warned off the ridge. Politely." Ethan nodded. "Good." They didn't eat. As dusk settled, Valkyrie moved restlessly, pacing from door to window, then back again. Her discipline was fraying, not into panic, but into urgency. "She knows something's coming," Maddie said. Ethan watched her closely. Not something. Someone. The sound came just after nightfall. Footsteps. Not on the road, not on the porch. Behind the cabin. Ethan moved instantly, one hand lifting in a silent signal. Maddie froze. Tom shifted position, eyes scanning. Valkyrie stopped pacing. She stood perfectly still. The back door handle turned. Once. Twice. Then force. Measured. Controlled. Ethan opened the door before it could be breached. The man outside staggered back, surprised. He was younger than Ethan had expected. Early 30s. Broad but lean, with a close-cropped beard and eyes that darted too quickly for comfort. His jacket was dark, unmarked, practical. A man used to working without being remembered. "Wrong house," Ethan said calmly. The man's gaze flicked past him, to Valkyrie. Recognition flashed. That was his mistake. He bolted. Ethan followed without hesitation. The chase cut through trees and underbrush, the forest swallowing sound. The man moved fast, but he didn't know the terrain. Ethan did. Valkyrie ran ahead, not chasing blindly, but angling. Cutting off escape routes, her movements fluid and precise. She didn't bark, didn't snarl, She worked. The man vaulted a fallen log. Valkyrie cleared it cleanly, landing hard on the other side. She slipped, just slightly, on damp leaves. Enough. Her footing went out, and she hit the ground with a sharp sound. Ethan's chest tightened. He could have kept going. He didn't. He turned back immediately, dropping to one knee beside her. She scrambled to rise, favoring her front leg, teeth clenched in silent frustration. "Easy," Ethan said, hands steady as he checked her shoulder. "Not broken?" Strained. The man disappeared into the trees. Tom arrived moments later, breath heavy. "You had him." Ethan didn't look up. "No." He lifted Valkyrie carefully, feeling the solid weight of her body tense, resisting. "I'm fine," her posture seemed to say. "I know," Ethan replied quietly, "but we're done running." They returned to the cabin slowly. Maddie met them at the door, eyes widening when she saw Valkyrie's limp. She knelt immediately, checking the joint with practiced hands. "She'll recover," Maddie said after a moment. "But she needs rest." Valkyrie huffed softly, displeased. Ethan sat on the floor beside her, one hand resting against her side. He felt the tremor beneath her skin. Not pain, but adrenaline burning off. "I should have kept going," he said under his breath. Valkyrie lifted her head and looked at him. Not accusing, not disappointed. Present. That was when Ethan understood what he had almost done. He had almost chosen success over loyalty. The same calculation that had haunted him before. He bowed his head briefly, forehead touching the floor. Never again. Later that night, long after Maddie and Tom had fallen into uneasy sleep, Valkyrie stirred. Ethan woke instantly. She rose and limped to the door, then stopped, glancing back at him. Not urgent, inviting. Ethan followed her outside. The night was still, moonlight washing the clearing in pale silver. Valkyrie moved slowly toward the edge of the woods, then stopped beside a tree Ethan had passed 100 times. She lowered her head and pressed her nose to the bark. Then she stepped back. Ethan knelt, brushing away loose soil. Embedded in the trunk, nearly invisible, was a small black device. A tracker, active. Ethan removed it carefully, holding it between his fingers. The casing was scuffed, old but functional. Maddie appeared behind him, breath sharp. They tagged the cabin. Tom joined them, eyes dark. No, they tagged her. Ethan looked down at Valkyrie. "She brought it here on purpose," he said slowly, "so we'd find it." Valkyrie met his gaze, steady despite the pain in her leg. Not instinct, choice. Ethan closed his hand around the device. "That's the leverage," he said. The night remained quiet. But the rules had changed. Someone had crossed onto his ground. And this time, Ethan Cole would not let them decide what happened next. Morning arrived without apology. Sunlight spilled through the trees and across the clearing as if nothing had changed. As if the night before hadn't drawn a line no one could erase. The cabin stood quiet, its windows reflecting sky and water, the forest breathing around it in slow, patient rhythms. Ethan woke seated on the floor beside Valkyrie. He hadn't meant to sleep there. It had just happened. His back against the wall, one hand resting near her shoulder. Alertness fading into something softer when he realized she was breathing steadily again. The strain in her front leg had eased, though she still favored it when she shifted. "You don't quit," he murmured. More observation than praise. Valkyrie opened one eye and closed it again. Maddie moved quietly in the kitchen area, preparing coffee they all knew would taste burnt. Her hair was loose now, dark strands falling forward as she leaned over the counter. The fatigue in her posture wasn't from lack of sleep alone. It came from the weight of knowing what came next. Tom stood near the window, phone pressed to his ear, voice low. When he ended the call, his face was set with a resolve Ethan recognized. "They're moving," Tom said. Not Reed himself, legal, quiet. He's trying to get ahead of it. Maddie turned. Ahead of what? Tom met Ethan's gaze. The truth. Ethan nodded. Then we don't wait. He rose, joints stiff, and reached into the pack he'd set by the door. Inside, wrapped carefully, was the device Valkyrie had led him to the night before. He didn't bring it out yet. Not here. Not like this. We do this clean, Ethan said. Once. Maddie swallowed. And after? Ethan looked at Valkyrie. She was watching him closely, head lifted, eyes clear. After, he said, we accept whatever it costs. They didn't drive straight to town. Instead, they took the long route, looping south before turning back, giving Tom time to coordinate with the few people he still trusted. The truck rolled steadily, tires humming over asphalt, the lake flashing into view between trees. Ethan felt the familiar pull of movement, clarity arriving with each mile. He had spent years reacting to chaos. This time, he was choosing it. The federal building sat low and unassuming at the edge of town, bricks softened by age, flags stirring gently in the breeze. No spectacle, no crowd. Agent Rebecca Collins met them inside. She looked the same as she had at the festival. Short gray hair neat, posture straight, eyes sharp without being unkind. Her handshake was firm, her attention immediate. Mr. Cole, she said. Dr. Shaw, Ranger Alvarez. Her gaze flicked briefly to Valkyrie, who stood at Ethan's side, calm but watchful. You brought the dog, Collins noted. Yes, Ethan replied. She's part of this. Collins studied him for a long second, then nodded. So am I. They moved into a small conference room. No windows. Neutral walls. A place built for decisions rather than comfort. Ethan placed the device on the table. Maddie inhaled sharply despite herself. Collins didn't touch it. She leaned forward, examining it with a professional eye. Where did you find this? Ethan answered carefully. On my property. It was active. Collins' jaw tightened. That's a violation. Of more than one thing, Tom added. Collins straightened. It's also evidence. She looked at Ethan again. Once I log this, it leaves your hands. Ethan nodded. I understand. Collins hesitated. There will be questions about you, about why you didn't report earlier. I didn't have proof earlier, Ethan said. Now I do. Silence stretched. Collins reached for the device. Then we proceed. By noon, the town felt different. Unmarked vehicles appeared where they hadn't before. Conversations lowered in volume. Doors closed a little faster. Word traveled quietly, carried by the kind of curiosity that didn't need confirmation. Maddie watched from the clinic window, arms wrapped around herself. This is happening? Yes, Tom said. And it's bigger than Reed. Ethan stood outside with Valkyrie, hand resting lightly against her back. He felt her weight there, solid and real. This is where I stop pretending I can control the outcome, he said. Maddie looked at him. You already did that when you stayed. The call came just after lunch. Ethan answered without looking at the screen. You should have given her back, Daniel Reed's voice said calmly. Ethan closed his eyes for half a second. You shouldn't have tagged my home. A pause. You've complicated things, Reed continued. For people who don't deserve the attention. Ethan looked down at Valkyrie. She met his gaze, steady. "Then they shouldn't have built a business on silence," Ethan replied. Another pause. Longer this time. "You always think you're choosing the harder right," Reed said. "Sometimes you're just choosing to stand alone." Ethan ended the call. The room felt quieter for it. The operation unfolded without drama. That was what surprised Ethan most. No sirens, no shouting, just vehicles arriving at North Ridge under official authority, doors opening, people stepping out with practiced efficiency. Papers served, access requested, refused, then overridden. Maddie watched from a distance, her hands trembling only slightly. "I've waited years to see this." Tom stood beside her. "It's not over." "No," she agreed, "but it started." Valkyrie shifted, leaning into Ethan's leg. Her ears angled toward the ridge, tracking movement. Not anxious, alert. They found dogs. Not all of them. Some had already been moved. Some records were gone. But enough remained. Kennels hidden beneath clean floors, medical logs scrubbed and rewritten, transport schedules that didn't match public filings. Enough. Daniel Reed was escorted out hours later. Without his tailored calm, he looked smaller, older. The lines around his eyes deeper now that calculation had nowhere to hide. He didn't look at Ethan as he passed. Ethan didn't look away. Evening returned gently. The cabin welcomed them back with familiar quiet, the lake reflecting gold and shadow in equal measure. Maddie sank onto the bench outside, exhaustion finally winning. "I don't know what comes next," she said. Tom nodded. "Investigations take time. Some things won't be fixed." Maddie looked at Valkyrie. "But some will." Ethan stood at the door, one hand resting on the frame. He felt the weight lift, not disappear, but redistribute. This place, this choice, no longer felt like an escape. It felt like a beginning. Valkyrie lay near the hearth, legs stretched carefully, eyes half-lidded. When Ethan approached, she shifted just enough to make room beside her. He sat. For a long moment, they simply breathed. "I won't put you back into a system that forgets you," he said quietly. Valkyrie's tail thumped once against the floor. Outside, the forest settled into night. Ethan rose and opened the door, letting cool air spill inside. Light from the cabin stretched across the threshold, warm and steady. He didn't flinch. If something knocked again, anything lost enough to ask, he knew what he would do. He would stay. Sometimes miracles do not arrive with thunder or fire. They come quietly, through a dog that refuses to leave, through a man who chooses to stay, through a moment when doing the right thing costs more than walking away. Perhaps God does not always part the sea for us. Sometimes he places a soul in our path and waits to see whether we will open the door. In our daily lives, we may never face danger in the woods or stand against powerful systems. But we all face smaller moments, when kindness is inconvenient, when silence feels safer than truth, when turning away would be easier than caring. This story is a reminder that faith is often revealed through action. Through staying when leaving is simpler, through protecting the vulnerable when no one is watching. Through trusting that doing what is right, even alone, is never wasted. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who may need hope today. Leave a comment and tell us what this story meant to you. And subscribe to the channel so these stories can continue to reach those who are still searching. May God bless you and your family. May he protect the weary, strengthen the faithful, and guide every soul that feels lost back toward the light. Thank you for watching.